Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Sapienti, and I'm the Vice President of Clinical Science and Technology with MDIC. I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar, where we're going to be focused on a chapter within our Leadership Engagement Playbook, a work stream within the Case for Quality. Before I do that, I'd like to give those folks a little bit of background on who MDIC is, the Case for Quality, and a little bit of information in terms of the Leadership Engagement Playbook. So beginning with the MDIC, we are a 501c3 company, a public-private organization that started in 2012 with the sole responsibility of engaging with a variety of stakeholders within the complex medical device ecosystem. And what you can see here in the diagram on the left is the breakdown of the various stakeholders within MDIC and the stakeholders that we work with, starting with government agencies, and certainly government agencies, not just FDA, but you see NIH and NIST, CMS. And then we move into the industry made up of device manufacturers, diagnostics groups, and as well as now the ever-expanding digital health technology area. And then finally, our nonprofits, which are made up of academia, payers and providers, as well as patients and those patient advisory groups. The regulatory science tools that we focus on really cover a very diverse area. And you can see on the right-hand side areas within cybersecurity, digital health, which is a new vertical that we just launched in February, as well as some of those areas within augmented reality, virtual reality, and the medically extended reality, as well as some areas like Case for Quality, which we're going to talk about in a minute or two. But you can see how diverse our product portfolio is and the number of programs we have within MDIC, which explains why we have the outreach we do with the vast stakeholders, and why we are really one of the only groups in the industry that does what we do, which is being the convener of these critical stakeholders in what we call the non-competitive or pre-competitive spaces. So again, this is a trusted workspace for everyone to be able to come together and really talk about and solve complex issues that we see in the medical device ecosystem. Next slide. So a little bit of history in the Case for Quality collaborative community. As you can see here, we started in the 2014 timeframe, and one of the areas that we focused on was having our very first forum, which was part of the charter for Case for Quality, was to establish public forums to bring in those the various stakeholders. And it was during that first period of time where we actually launched our first 4 working groups. And for those of you who may be familiar with Case for Quality from the beginning, recall the metrics, the analytics, the competency model, as well as the maturity model work streams. We then advanced into the next few years where we start to develop these work streams, and we start to develop the products of these work streams, which today are actually publicly available on our MDIC website. We then get into the development of the Voluntary Improvement Program pilot, which actually is the maturity of the maturity model. When we first launched the maturity model, we talked about how can companies look to MDIC for assistance in continuous improvement. And that's where the VIP program was later developed as a pilot. We then get into continuously developing more and more programs, and you'll see that in the 2018 timeframe, we actually, while we sunsetted a couple of programs, we actually launched 4 additional work streams. One of which we're going to talk today about is the leadership engagement, or what was previously called C-suite engagement. And now we're in a phase in the 2021 timeframe where we've seen a couple of things. We've seen the transformation of Case for Quality into a collaborative community back in November of 2020. And we've also seen the transition of the VIP pilot into a full program, which really gives us the staying power of the VIP program and gives us the opportunity to leverage the information to then work on future projects. And we also have the Accelerate Sustainable Capability Project or pilot, which is also initiated and ongoing, which is essentially built off of the foundation of the VIP. So you'll see that we continue to drive continuous improvement. We continue to focus on product quality and patient safety, delivering on these projects. Next slide, please. So when we talk about the leadership engagement, which was previously known as the C-suite engagement project, we had a mission of really altering or changing the culture and the conversation from compliance to quality. And so what you see here is the number of folks that we had in the team that got us to the point where we've established and developed the playbook. And really the approach that we took was, where are we in terms of listening to those thought leaders, CEOs, and leaders of organizations that really set the tone for the communication of culture, especially when you're talking about change. You want that tone to start from the top. And so this program is no different when we started to do our outreach of the leaders. And that's why we actually changed the name from C-suite engagement to leadership engagement, because we wanted to branch out and get the opinions of key leaders within organizations, not just at the C-suite level. And so you'll see the approach that we had where we're establishing the baseline and then working on the approaches towards implementation, ultimately looking at ways to pilot the results of our playbook. So I'd like to talk now a little bit about some of the survey results and why we're here today. Next slide, please. So what we did was we surveyed a number of leaders across the industry, and we saw that with the 88 responses that we did get, we did see an overwhelming positive response. But what we also noticed was that there are areas of opportunity, and the areas of opportunity that we see are measuring poor quality, embracing the value of good quality, and really talking about how do organizations embrace that and the approaches that are out there. And for some of you in the industry, I'm sure you would agree that when you're talking about measures of cost of poor quality or measures of value of quality, there are a number of approaches. So what we'd like to do today, and I'll pass it over to Rama, we'd like to hear from Milan Shah, who represents an organization that is on the similar journey that many of us were on or are on when it comes to establishing and measuring the value of quality. So Rama, I'll pass it over to you, and you can do the introductions and start the interview process.
Thank you, Joe. That was very helpful. And hi, I'm Rama Pidabarthi. I'm a Vice President of Quality and Regulatory Services for Medical Device and Life Sciences from L&T Technology Services. And I've been working with MDIC since the inception of MDIC for this Case for Quality initiative. And I am very fortunate to have the opportunity to work with all the leaders from the industry and a lot of consulting groups. And for this webinar, we chose the topic of measuring the value of quality. And also we chose a company, Biopharmas, as in the digital health space. The reason for choosing this company for this interview, and Milan Shah is the Chief Technology Officer for this, is we've been on a journey of digital health being slightly different from the pure manufacturing-centric medical devices. And IDC has done a survey recently published a month ago that basically said, what are the top 10 things in life sciences? And of course, digital health came at the top of that list. And so now I'll touch upon the reasons for choosing Biopharmas. As I said, it's a digital health company, meaning they have products which are software as a medical device and a little bit of software in a medical device, but all digital in the sense that they have a sensor-based wearables that will measure the vitals of a patient. And then these vitals can be sent on the cloud, and a clinical healthcare professional can view the vitals and use that in the context of remote patient monitoring, but also there are software as a medical device applications which do analytics of this data that's put on the cloud. So all these are purely digital in the sense that they're used for therapeutics and in clinical trials and remote patient monitoring, but it's predominantly a digital health products company. And Milan has been working in the space since last year, since January of 2020, when he joined Bioformis. And before that, he's been a technologist for more than 20 years. And he worked at Microsoft and also Computer Associates, and founded a few companies in the cybersecurity space. And it's really important to understand the technologies coming into the medical devices with a significant software background to help as the Chief Technology Officer for this digital health company. And we are focusing on this topic of measuring the value of quality, and George Zach and Elizabeth Gaipa will be interviewing along with me, Milan Shah. So, George, is it Liz that you have asked?
Thanks for having us, Rama. I'm looking forward to this conversation with you, Liz, and especially Milan.
Me too. Thanks for joining and allowing us to participate.
So, Milan, would you introduce yourself a little bit about the...
I will. Thank you, Rama, George, Liz, and Joe, for having us on this webinar. Truly exciting times for us. So by way of introduction, I'm Milan Shah. I'm the CTO at a company called Bioformis, which, as Rama mentioned, is in the digital therapeutic space. And just to build up a little bit on my own background as well as Bioformis, really what we see happening is every once in a while, right, a whole perfect storm of opportunities sort of comes together that can often have, very, very disruptive type of effects, right? So what we see is really three important elements that have come together. So one is, of course, the advent of wearables and very, very cheap sensors, right? So that is allowing us to get some incredible signals, life science signals at a very low cost, at a very, very high rate. Of course, the second question after that becomes, well, now that you have all this data, what are you going to do with it? So as it turns out, AI and ML algorithms and technologies, which have been under development for the last 25, 30 years, really speaking, are really essentially textbook problems to be solved in the health sciences space, right? The ability to do predictive diagnostics and therapeutics based on this data that we suddenly have, right? And then, of course, all of this requires a tremendous amount of computing power, which up until quite recently wasn't really feasible to do and deliver. But here comes the cloud. The cloud is here, and it's literally very horizontally scalable compute power available at a very reasonable cost, right? So when you put these three things together, what we're seeing is a massive opportunity. Not just us, but many people in the industry are seeing a massive opportunity to apply the confluence of these three technologies to the problem of fundamentally changing the way humankind takes care of itself, hopefully dramatically improving the quality of life, both on the wellness side as well as in the illness side, and fundamentally changing the shape of how care is delivered and consumed. That's what brings us to Bioformis, which is we are very fortunate to have some compelling technology in this space, and we are seeing unprecedented demand from our customers for the types of solutions that we're seeing, and we are obviously seeing a lot of peer companies as well doing equally well. So truly exciting to be here, and as hopefully we'll find out soon, what we have discovered through our own experience is that the centerpin of all of this is actually quality. Focus on the quality is really the trick to success in this particular space.
So, Milan, I would like to focus on the strategy of quality that you had and will have now. And one of the reasons I chose the design controls aspect of it, at least from a value of quality, is that the top 5 reasons for FDA warning letters have been design controls and CAPAs, complaints, supplier quality, and process controls. And as we see that the cost of quality is definitely going to be much better managed if you catch things in the design control phase. Substantially, the number of complaints and CAPAs and all can reduce if the product quality is significantly high for the patient's value. So what strategy you have and had, and of course, you're also a small company as well as with some mergers and acquisitions of other small companies and geographically distributed. This is another aspect of biopharmas that you may want to use in this strategy you have and you will have.
Absolutely, Rama. We not so long ago, about 2.5 years ago, at this point, we were in fact just about a 30% company, exclusively built up of data scientists putting together, predictive technologies and so on and so forth. And then through a confluence of events, we have built up the company to a significantly bigger size. We're about 500 people now. And part of it came through strategic acquisitions. In the context of this conversation, I'd highlight, one of the acquisitions, which happens to be a wearable company based out of Switzerland. As we grew at this dramatic rate, what we really found is that, all of us were in one way, shape, or form in the medical devices space. So all of us had, quality systems and quality SOPs and so on and so forth. And the obvious need was to try and harmonize the quality standards, integrate and consolidate all of the quality systems that we had, and as well as the fact that we were fundamentally an international company. We were founded in Singapore. Acquisitions that we have made have been in other countries like Switzerland. And then about 2 years ago, we shifted our headquarters to the United States, right? So one of the initial focuses was to do all this harmonization and really prepare us for FDA approval processes and FDA standards and so on, right? Along with that, we were obviously being used in an investigational sense. Our technology was being used to see what the effectiveness and the potential of our solution was actually at. And that was an eye-opening experience to us, right? What we discovered, really speaking, is that as we put our technology to use in a pilot fashion, investigational fashion, and so on and so forth, it became all too clear that all of the promise of all this wonderful technology, wearables, cloud, AI, ML, right? All of them are fundamentally imperfect technologies, right? And really, the entire promise would be lost if we didn't focus on quality. So very quickly, we started discovering that the trick to success over here was going to be a focus on quality. I'll give a very simple example, right? So AI, ML algorithms, they all have sensitivities, specificity curves, and so on and so forth, right? And the focus on quality can make the difference between an AOC of 95% versus 75%, right? Makes all the difference between something that is actually clinically useful versus something that's closer to a coin toss, right? So and that the difference is often the focus on quality. Back then, when we were just coming together as the company in the shape and form that we are now, the focus was just a classic harmonize it, integrate it, call it done type of thing. And then quickly, we have realized that actually is the centerpin of our technology. And so now the strategy is it starts very early on in the design control process, not even the design control, but phase one of design control. What exactly are we building? What exactly is the kind of performance and efficacy we are going to need to achieve in order to actually be a useful system and to deliver the kind of promise that we think the technology is capable of, and then working backwards from there to all the design inputs, design outputs, and so on and so forth, full verification and so on, and then extending into the manufacturing side and ensuring that there's a quality standard applied all the way through. And then, of course, what comes out the other end is something that hits the intended target and then achieves the goal. And when, of course, it does that, it is, quite a satisfying, of course, experience for everybody involved. But the point is, we had several trials and situations where the technology fundamentally did work, except varying quality standards at different components and different interface levels is what reduced the efficacy of the system enough that it ultimately became of marginal utility, right? So it really helped serve our focus on quality as the center pin of how to make this technology work.
Liz, you have a question for Milan?
I do. So sort of related to your quality strategy, as you've entered different markets that might have unique regulatory or customer expectations, how have you had to adjust your quality strategy for these new markets?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, right? So one of the elements of quality has been true quality, not just necessarily regulatory-based quality, but the actual real-world quality of our products, right? So I'll give a simple example, right? One of the very simple, trivial examples I would say, right, would be that okay, there's a need to measure things like pulse rate and respiratory rate and so on and so forth, right? Now there are very well-baked and well-understood standards on how to build a system that hits a certain performance level and so on, right? And it's work to actually hit those standards and so on. Now, the reality is that those things are still clean room type of environments. When you put a system into use in the real world, the systems actually will behave differently and will actually have a perceived and a real quality difference over there. This is especially true when you start expanding into international markets where the demographic differences are there, cultural differences are present, and so on. So you have to really think about quality requirements from the get-go about some of these aspects in order to actually make sure that the system will work in the real world when you release it, right? And if you think about them up front, you tend to incorporate the requirements and the design elements needed to hit those differences. And then again, what comes out is a system that will actually work in the system. As most of the audience probably knows over here, there's the few core standards, the FDA, the CE mark, China, Japan, etc., that serve as the backbone of the most regulatory standards. Most of the other countries are variations or adaptations of these core regulatory frameworks. So again, it's important to keep those 4 to 7 regulatory standards in mind when coming through with the overall design for a product.
You make it sound easy, but it's great that you guys have thought through all that, and certainly all the changing regulatory standards don't make it any easier. George, do you want to follow up on this question?
Thanks, Liz. I'm curious, Milan, as to on a day-to-day basis, what measures when you come in and you're looking as to how you're performing from a quality perspective, what are the measures that you are looking at? What are the ones that are, if you will, keeping you up at night if they start to track adversely?
Yeah, so obviously, and we've had instances of this as well, right? Certainly CAPAs and adverse events and things along those lines, right? Super critical to have very robust systems in place. I'll give an example. Our systems, as opposed to typical startup experiences where there's a ramp to your solution and adaptation. In our case, what happened is COVID suddenly hit while we had just perfected the product, and suddenly we were deployed in many countries across thousands of patients and so on and so forth, right? Now, one of the things that happened, a very, very small percentage, less than 0.001% of the patient population actually reported a scar where our wearable was placed, right? Obviously, seemed like it was located where the LEDs for the optical sensor would have been presented, right? Now, it was the fact that we had robust DMRs and robust adverse effect reporting systems that we were able to catch this very, very quickly. In one case, we actually ended up putting a pause to the use of the product in a particular health system until we could get to the bottom of it, and ultimately determined that there are some people whose skins are actually going to be reactive to this particular wavelength and so on. It is a very rare occurrence, but it is a side effect over there that was thoroughly reviewed by a safety board and then found to be, in our case, more than acceptable. But again, it was the ability of us to demonstrate the entire post-market surveillance process and the tools and evidence that we had collected about the number of devices having been deployed. In our case, the wearables are reusable, so we could even show that the wearables had been worn by many patients before without any adverse effect, and after without any adverse effect, and only a few patients were affected by this particular condition. It was easily ointment would have cured the scar, and so we were able to get back into production use within a matter of 2 days, right, after a thorough review by the safety board. So certainly those kinds of incident reports are critical to keep an eye on and to respond quickly so that you don't put patient safety at any kind of risk. And more than patient safety, in many cases, if the issue turns out not to be a material issue, the lack of ability to respond quickly would actually have removed the service from a very large swath of people who really could have used the service at the time. So that is important to pay special attention to. Is a robust, post-market surveillance system to be in place. Yeah. Outside of that, what we pay attention to is going back to more than just the table stakes quality standards, right? So we pay a lot of attention to things like outages, things like sudden changes in the signals that we are perceiving. Again, as I mentioned, all of these signals are obviously validated to international standards, but all validations, all testing happens in clean room, lab room conditions, right? Whereas in the real world, people are ambulatory. They are moving around and going about their daily lives and so on and so forth, right? And ensuring and keeping an eye on the quality of the signals that we are receiving is what we tend to take care of. Outages is another kind of metric, right? If somebody's wearing a wearable for X number of hours a day, how much of that hours are we able to produce an output and so on and so forth, right? So the actual delivery of the signals is the kinds of metrics that we are tracking in order to determine the true quality of the product.
Thanks. It sounds like you've given a lot of thought as to what those measures are, and then building in systems that allow you to detect signals from them quickly so that you can react to them well. Back to you, Liz.
Sure. So suppliers are certainly a key component in our success in delivering quality products. What measures do you employ to evaluate and monitor your suppliers? And how have you evolved that approach right from the beginning to where you are currently today?
Yeah, that has been particularly challenging, Liz. So one of the things, so I will talk about it in two buckets, right? So obviously we have a physical wearable. We also have software as a service, which tends to be the bigger part of the technology that we have, where the manufacturers, so to speak, are cloud providers and so on and so forth, right? So we start with the base table stakes of design transfer to both contract manufacturers, and we treat our DevOps and our cloud provider as effectively the manufacturer of our software, right? Once it's released, that they are the ones who are providing the actual service at scale to our patients and so on. So you start with well-defined design transfer processes and so on. And where we have really found the need to keep a sharp eye on and keep evolving, right, is really the end-of-line testing the post-market surveillance again on the performance of the devices, and then trying to trace back to any kinds of changes or deltas or improvements that we can make at the manufacturing level itself. Yeah. I'll give a simple example, right? The cloud, everybody thinks it's super stable and so on and so forth. Well, guess what? AWS, we've had incidences where, not to name necessarily a vendor, but the cloud provider basically served notice saying, hey, we are upgrading this swath of hardware and your systems will be down for about 2 minutes, right? Well, that's not necessarily an acceptable thing in our space, right? So keeping a sharp eye on that, building in redundancies, and improving, as I mentioned, the end of line testing, I should say, has been very important in ensuring that as we scale our solution out to large swaths of patients, that we are able to maintain that quality of the experience. What has proven especially challenging is that given all the supply chain disruptions caused by the pandemic, we've had a disproportionate effort in terms of having to find replacement suppliers, replacement parts, equivalent parts, everything from, the world apparently has run out of nylon, of all things, right? And trying to find a replacement nylon for a part that everybody takes for granted introduces a fair amount of work and sometimes even changes required to continue to keep the overall supply constant and to meet the demands and so on. So anticipating that and having expertise on tap at each of these levels is becoming critical to work during this pandemic times, yeah, because when you're notified that, hey, this part is just run out of stock, or the lead time on this is 52 weeks now, and we need to find a replacement, you want to be able to very quickly evaluate and settle in on a replacement part or material very quickly, and be able to respond again all the way through sometimes to the regulatory process. To do a letter to file or whatever it might be needed to keep the solution available at all times.
Yeah, certainly the current situation is one we did not foresee, and has certainly created a lot of challenges, but that's where having strong systems in place have so benefited us. So George, you want to take the next question?
Sure. I think we're kind of getting to this, but the focus on measuring the value of quality, how has that been helpful to your business? I'm really looking for how you connect your quality goals and the measuring of quality. How is that tied directly or indirectly to a value back to the business, Milan?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think many of our companies, right, certainly we have grown by hiring a lot of people who have a wealth of experience from various different organizations and so on. So the incumbent sort of group thinking that we started with was, well, quality is something that you have to do. You have to take it perhaps a little bit more seriously than the average commercial venture, but there are standards and you hit them and you're good to go, right? And as I mentioned, not to belabor the point too much, right? What we have realized is that, especially in this area of digital therapeutics and digital software solutions for medicine, right? Quality is actually it's not a marginal improvement to your cost of doing business. It is the very essence of the business. Without the quality, it's an existential element of making this technology work, right? Without the quality aspect, the technologies will actually combine in a suboptimal way where it actually won't deliver on the promise that it is. It is a daily reminder to us, right, that we are very proud of a lot of the technologies we have built. It's also very sophisticated, machine learning, AI, incredible sensors, incredible compute power being expended and so on and so forth. But every day we are reminded that even without us, people are actually taken care of. People don't just die left, right, and center. There are existing standards of care which are very, very effective, and the humankind, is fundamentally a healthy population. So if we actually have to deliver an impact, we have to improve on that very high standard of care that already exists. In other words, the only difference between all this technology and the existing incumbent standard of care is quality. If technology can be used to improve the quality of the standard of care, then we have a way forward. And without the quality, it doesn't even make sense to try and attempt to put all this technology together. So I think the quality to us has become really the centerpin of how we think about building and delivering our solutions.
Great. Thanks, Milan. Liz?
So diving into your internal processes a little bit. So as you look at, say, hardware and software, are there differences in how you measure and the approach you take to looking at quality?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, Liz. Yeah. So what we find, certainly on the hardware side, there are probably a much deeper set of existing standards, right? So if you're building something, for example, that is going to communicate wirelessly, there's a plethora of standards that have been prescriptive standards that have been defined on how to, or what the requirements are, what the constraints are, and all the technical parameters in terms of signal strengths and so on and so forth that are allowed and not allowed and so on and so forth, right? The software side is much more guidance driven, a lot less prescriptive, a lot more open to interpretation, right? So it becomes especially important to really think through on the software side what kinds of quality measures are going to be important, right? So we, of course, have focused on, realized that code coverage is an important one, and then having a pretty deep a set of test cases that cover, I call them the 4 pillars, right? The success cases, the failure cases, the boundary conditions, and the scale conditions, right? Along each one of those boundaries, you want to have a deep level of test cases available in order to really validate and verify that your software is going to work when put out into the commercial world. There are very few international or any standards available to that help you prescribe or are prescriptive about this standards, but coming at it from strict discipline is fundamentally required over here. But there's a big difference with the hardware side. There are a lot of guardrails that you can rely on to get it right. With software, there's a lot more open-ended judgment and decisions to be made.
Good insights. Thank you for sharing that. Rama?
So I found the experience working with bioinformatics, I've been helping them also, is that this software aspect of it is going to make it, like just Milan said, a lot more challenging for the simple reason that the changes can happen very easily with software. In general, with manufacturing, you have enough time to think through the changes and you can have deadlines. And once you release a software as a solution for the healthcare, sometimes you need to make changes immediately, and the change management I'm coming to is also another important aspect of extension of a design controls, where product is released and the software changes can be made easily and quickly, but the change management, controlling that extremely well, is very important also as part of this. So I have given a talk on this 2 years ago at the MetCon, and basically the regulatory framework and quality compliance framework for digital products. But I had the experience in the last 2 years with this experience also with bioinformatics to actually learn that, make that theory into practice, and learned a lot. And as we were helping this focus really shifted to product quality for patient safety. I know Milan said that quality is existential to their business, but I also think it's existential to CTO's quality of life. Because if they have good quality of product, then obviously there'll be less CAPAs, complaints, and less fires to put out. That itself is a state to get to. And that realization is definitely there in Biopharmas with Milan and the rest of the team I interact with, which is the focus of the leadership engagement from our team that, hey, you need to focus on quality because there's a benefit to everybody, especially your business. In that sense, this has been a very good experience for us. Thank you, Milan, for your time, and it's been a wonderful discussion, I thought.
So thanks everyone for joining our webinar. I hope you found it interesting and engaging. We will be preparing other webinars and other engaging talks on different chapters of the playbook. If you're interested in the playbook, please visit mdic.org and download a copy. Thank you.